Wait, you sold everything
Yeah.
and you didn't know what you were going to do and you just decided to come here.
Yeah. Part of why I wanted to quit is because I wanted to build my life less centered around work. This is sort of the fundamental frame if we are not a worker. How do you design life not centered around work?
That's a dream. I always thought I also want to try the nomad life. And what I felt was I'm just literally working at another place. All I was doing was just working. How do you manage that?
And I was trying to disidentify with being a worker. It basically worked. I didn't make more than 30 grand, which is about 20% of what I made previously of like my own personal exploration. And what I write about is like, I would make the claim that none of us are workers. We are not workers. We are humans.
Welcome back to Pick It for Show's podcast and welcome back to another episode. Today we're having Paul Millerd. Welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
So let me do a short introduction about you. Paul Millerd spent 10 years in strategy consulting at McKinsey & Company, also BCG and other consulting firms. He was helping companies with CEO succession and transition. Then he quit in 2017, giving up the job with a really well-paid salary without having any income sources lined up. What made you decide to quit?
I think for me, it was an accumulation of experiences over the years. When I first started out in consulting, I loved it. It was so challenging. It pushed me. It was the first time in my life I was in an environment that really expected me to be more than just get the good grade and then you could kind of coast.
Right.
So I loved that. If you succeed in consulting, the next path is to become like a partner or climb the ladder. And what you're pushed to do is sell projects and win projects and care about client billings. I actually just love the work. And so part of me quitting, I think, was just trying to build a path around the work and like sort of intrinsic motivation that I actually wanted to express in the world.
Right.
On top of that, I think as my motivation declined over time, I just felt this increasing dissatisfaction. I always had this. Every job except McKinsey, actually, I desperately wanted to escape or quit. And even there, I wanted to go to business school because I wanted to keep moving. So I had for 10 years this underlying dissatisfaction that nothing was ever good enough and I needed to escape and go to the next thing. I was always living in the future. And I think living in that way was not how I wanted to live my life. And so blowing it up was sort of just walking away from that world and saying, I just need to like hit reset. And I didn't even know what I was going to do at the start. It was more just like, I need time. I need to just not do what I'm doing now.
But you didn't know what did you actually want?
The story I told people and myself was that I was going to become a freelance consultant, which is the least imaginative thing to become if you were a full-time consultant.
Which did you end up doing?
I did for about 6 to 9 months. I really went all in on it. Mostly driven by I'd quit my job in New York without any income streams and was quickly realizing, oh crap, my savings is going down very rapidly. So I was driven to just like plateau my savings. I went all in for about 5 to 6 months, landed a bunch of gigs, did make some money. And I think what I found is in the experience of doing those jobs, I loved the increased freedom I had. I was able to work remotely. I was able to have a lot more autonomy. I didn't have annoying managers neurotically like trying to control the color of the slides I was doing. So I loved that, but I still just like couldn't start the work. There was this one situation, I'm in Boston and I have this presentation I need to do for a check-in. It's about 2 weeks ahead of where I am. Every day I'm going to this co-working and I'm like, I'm going to do it today.
Right.
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, next week. The check-in's like Friday. I am there Thursday. I'm like, I really should do this. I don't even do it on Thursday. I eventually do it Friday morning. And I'm just like, I don't want to feel this like disconnect from like what I'm doing. And from there, I really, in my head, I wasn't telling people this at the time, started making radical decisions of just saying, I'm going to do the opposite of everything I've done in the past. And so my head is generating a plan. Oh, you should make money. You should start this. You should start that. What if I just don't plan anything? and just start to listen to my intuition, what's inside. And it felt crazy and scary at the time, and I felt like a loser when people were asking me, what are you doing? What's your plan? Because I didn't have one. I'd often make something up. But in that stretch, I went on a trip to Asia to visit. I had a wedding in Malaysia, and my friend had moved to Taipei after traveling for a year and ended up staying here. So I'll visit Taipei, I'll go to Malaysia. On that trip, I landed a gig right before I left and was working remotely during the trip, making really good money, 10 hours a week.
What was that gig?
It was consulting training.
Okay.
So there was sort of this weird serendipitous feeling to all of this because that was something I loved doing when I was working at the firms. I would always coach people, teach people, train people. And I had done one small thing pro bono early on in the freelance experimentation. So I land that, I'm doing it. I actually enjoy it. When I'm in Taiwan, something about Taiwan just called me, and I had this connection. I felt that I just felt like pulled to come back.
What do you think that is?
I don't know. I don't
Tell this day.
I think there's a certain amount of magic in the world. And I've learned that if I am in like clenching, planning, rigid, this is the path for life mode, I don't open myself up to like clues from the universe. This is probably my most like woo theory. And so I think for the first time in my life, I was just like listening to how I was feeling and like paying attention to like myself, which is crazy at 33 to be experiencing that for the first time.
Right.
But yeah, I also had matched with my wife on Tinder during that trip.
Right.
But we did not.
After the wedding?
No. I had not, we hadn't met yet.
Oh, okay.
So she was living in Taipei. We matched on that trip, but we didn't meet up. I went back to Boston.
Okay.
Decided I was going to go nomadic, sold all my stuff, and booked a flight to Taiwan for like 3 months later. Came back in September, started living here. Was living in an Airbnb in Mincheng.
Wait, you sold everything and you didn't know what you were going to do and you just decided to come here?
Yeah.
How?
I don't know. And like, usually people go to Bali. For some reason, I was
Usually
like,
people
I'm going to go
have
to
a plan.
Taipei. You know what was guiding me at that time? I had this rule I came up with, which was find one friend I have and go wherever they are.
Okay.
So I did have some nomadic friends. My friend who lived in Taipei, he still lives here. He's a great friend. Shout out Irv. I just decided to come. And I was like, worst case, I'm just by myself all the time and I can hang out with my friend every once in a while. I was here at least a month, just sort of like trying to follow my intuition, living very frugally. I was living in like a twin bed in a shared room with this guy that was like living with a bunch of other people too. He's the Airbnb owner, eating at Bafang every day. And about a month in, I like Angie, like I thought of her. I don't know why. This is still like, I don't understand what happened, but I texted her. We met up then like 2 days later, and that sort of like shaped the rest of the journey because we quickly fell in love. We got married a year later. I ended up moving in with her in like 3 months in Taipei.
Right. And that's how you guys started the nomad life, traveling around?
No, so we got like a lease in Taipei. I went like nomadic and then immediately like signed a lease. Though our 3rd month, we actually went to Chiang Mai together. So we had this like taste of that kind of life, but she was going through the process of quitting her job and becoming a fitness trainer. So I decided I would just move to Taiwan, support her, and then figure out whatever the heck I was going to do to make money. It was so exciting, but also so scary. And I think for me, I was very much in this season of solitude of like getting to know myself, learning to slow down, and also making like very little, having the fears of a lot of family members projected upon me and such. And it was an exciting time though, I think, at least for me and Angie, because for us, we both were sort of like blowing up our lives and starting anew and like figuring out what we were going to do together.
How did you work on that fear that you're moving to a country without knowing what's happening and what are you going to do?
I didn't have much fear at the time. It was more, the biggest challenge emotionally was the shame and insecurity of what I was doing.
The shame?
The shame
of... What do you mean?
Walking away from all these opportunities. My parents didn't go to college or didn't graduate from college. I had like achieved the like dream.
Right. It is.
College grad, great companies, went to MIT for grad school, making a lot of money. I was like at the start of like when your income starts to go crazy in the US. And I was like, let me wander, not have a plan, make 20 grand a year. Which is like doable in Taiwan, but like not in the US. So I wasn't like a viable person in the US. They're like, you couldn't even live here. And so those were the fears and insecurities I was managing and like, oh, how am I going to make money? But in terms of like going for it, it just felt so right and obvious for the first time in my life. And a lot of my writing, I think, emerged out of following that feeling. Because it was so different. Everything I had experienced in the first chapter of my life.
Like what you said, that your parents didn't graduate from college. How did you convince them?
I'm about American. You don't really convince your parents.
Okay. Right. That's too Asian.
But yeah, I think I sort of like slowly informed them. After I had visited Asia, I was traveling around that month before I decided to sell all my stuff. I sort of knew I need to come back to Asia. I don't know why. I think I just had this desire to be on the other part of the world. A lot of people in Taiwan have that desire to like go to the US, to be on the other side of the world, experience a different culture.
I feel like that's everybody, around the world, because everyone just want to escape from their hometown or their country and try to go somewhere else to start a new life.
And so I was really scared to tell them I'm going to move to Taiwan without a plan.
What did they say?
They sort of found out, I think, through my cousin telling them. And at that point, they were sort of used to me like not following. Like even though I was employed, I was blowing up my life every 1.5 to 2 years to take a new job. And they were like, you sure this is smart? Don't you think you could be at GE for a long career, or don't you think you should stick with a company? And so I had never really followed the correct path, even though I was in a job. So they were sort of prepared for it. I think the hardest part was just like, okay, he's going to move across the world. I think the hardest part has been my wife's from here now. And so part of my life is in Taiwan. We want to expose our daughter to Taiwanese culture and food as well. And so that's just very hard for a parent. I mean, I imagine if my daughter's living in the other side of the world for me, well, I think in my case, I would just fly to her. But yeah, it'd be hard. It'd be very hard.
I realized that a lot of people these days, when you ask them to talk about themselves, what they do is they'll tell you what do they do. So how do you introduce or talk about yourself after you quit, that you no longer have that title?
I realized a few years in, I had basically 3 modes for answering this question. One is what I call the boomer compatible story. This is the one you tell like the older generation that's like, oh, I'm a business owner. I'm starting my own business, or I am a consultant and I have many clients serving on this niche, right? You give them an answer, and it doesn't have to be someone that's older. It's just somebody you're giving an answer so you could end the conversation. The second is sort of like the edge of what you're exploring, which is, I am doing a bunch of freelance consulting, but I'm also dabbling with writing and all these things. And these are for maybe your peers who might be interested, but many are not.
Right.
You give them the clue, though. You drop like a weird word, like, oh, I started a blog, a podcast. And if they pick up on it, then you go deep. And then there's the story for the weirdos. And so the story for the weirdos is, oh, I blew up my life. I have no plan. And I'm just wandering until the next download comes or something.
All right.
And those are for the friends who are like on similar paths.
Right.
Or are like, oh hell yeah, I'm in that liminal space too. Let's dive into that.
Right. So I think I've saw one of the articles that you wrote that you said you noticed that success shouldn't be what people define, like what they consider as impressive. So how did you realize that, or when, in what kind of situation that you noticed that?
Well, unfortunately, success is projected upon us by other people. People on my previous path, it was almost universal. Like people were projecting success on me and people admired me.
Yeah.
As soon as I left and the longer I left, I could sort of see like that sort of respect fade. People went from like, oh, I hear you're doing great at work to like what
are you doing?
What are you doing? I think it's really jarring to experience that because you realize that some people are attached to the story they have about you rather than the connection they have with you. And that can be really painful to deal with, especially if it's like loved ones who project this on you.
Right. And how did you work on that after you realized that,
I wrote
that fade away?
Yeah, I wrote another article about this. It's called Your Insecurities, Not Mine. And so what I've found is that with work, people are often projecting their insecurities onto other people, right? Aren't you worried about this? Aren't you worried about this? It's like, no, well, you are, right? And so often if you're on a weird path, people who crave security or a certain path they need to like resolve your situation into something that makes sense in their world, right? So they'll try to come up with something like, well, if I was in that situation, I'd be extremely scared about money. And then they'll say, oh, aren't you worried so much about money? Now, you have two options in that. You have, oh, yeah, I do worry about it, but I'm trying to figure some things out. If you say, no, I'm not actually worried about money or it's not my number one priority, that will throw somebody into like cognitive dissonance. And sometimes they'll get like angry at you. But the more you experience this, the more I think you just get used to it.
Right.
I mean, I imagine if you tell people you're a podcaster in Taiwan, even still in 2026, people are like, is that a job? Is that real? Like, yeah, it's like very real, but in other people's heads, it's not real, right?
Do you think that changed your relationship with money, that you don't see it or view it as important as how it was to you?
I think money was never a primary aim of life for me. I think I've always craved doing challenging things, pushing myself, growing, learning. The problem is when you're on a path that is defined around like money and prestige, money implicitly becomes an aim of your life, whether that is your priority or not. And so I think as I stayed longer in consulting, there were more people aimed at the money and wanting to make a ton of money by climbing the ladder. I didn't have that, so I couldn't sustain that path. I think after leaving too, I was very scared about money because I wasn't making any at first. And so I had that initial fear. And then I freak out every 3 to 6 months about like, what am I going to do next? I don't really have a great plan of how I'll make money in the next 2 to 3 years. But eventually, if you're on a path with like degrees of freedom where you can do work on your own terms, you need to decide, okay, am I solving the money problem as the first and foremost problem all the time? Or am I going to put that lower and solve like curiosity, engagement, connectedness, aliveness, all these things first? And then it's just years on path. I think you just get more used to it and more comfortable with it.
So were you freaking out every 2 or 3 months?
Especially at first. I mean, I still freak out a little bit. A bunch of things have really declined in the last year or two. Like a lot of my stuff is online. AI is changing how the web operates.
Right.
I had stuff built around like SEO and those things are declining. But I've sort of had this mindset of like, I'm going to lead with like, I'm going to follow my curiosity, aliveness, connectedness to the work. And I have enough things where I'm like, okay, these things could pay off and it's worth just focusing on this in the short term and just seeing what happens.
Was there some points that you regret leaving the job or?
No, I've never had that. I think this is the thing people have a hard time understanding is people are like, oh, I don't know what I do. I feel like it would be really scary having the financial insecurity. It's like, yes, and. It's like, yeah, it was more emotionally jarring after quitting my job. Mm-hmm. But I had this dual emotional experience of like this insecurity, the shame of like leaving a job I was supposed to be grateful for, with this like, wow, a sense of wonder of like what might happen. Uh-huh. And I think just internally, I have this sense of adventure that must be like quenched. And I was underexploring adventure early in my life to like fit in and get approval. And now I am definitely pursuing more adventure. I'm married to somebody that has that same drive, and so crazy because I really don't have a plan. I don't know how I'm going to make money a couple of years from now, but I feel more grounded and satisfied with life now, despite those things, than ever before. I think because I have a life designed around like me and my wife's very weird temperaments and aims.
Right. I really like one thing that you said. You said that goals aren't meant to make you comfortable. They're there to help you keep choosing the life and work that you want. Can you expand a little bit about that?
I think for me, it's more around experiments.
Right.
So like every experiment is a learning opportunity. I love learning. I love exploring the unknown and the future. And so I try to divide life up into like seasons where it's like, okay, over the next 3 months, what are the experiments I'm going to try, the kinds of work I'm going to do, the ways I can push myself to grow or learn new things. Right now, I'm like going down a Claude Code rabbit hole, as is everyone. But through every one of those, you learn more about yourself. And I really attune to aliveness, which is like, do I have energy to keep going? I really want to build my life around things that are hard to stop rather than hard to keep going.
Right.
So many people have this mindset that like work is supposed to be pain and suffering. Oh, I'm going to aim really high at this super big goal. I'm going to grind through it. I'm going to put in the effort. I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m. And I'm just not wired like that. I just want to do things I enjoy and like am motivated and like pumped to keep doing. Like I love writing so much now and like creating and like even conversations like this. I think this is an act of creation. Conversations have all this serendipity and who knows what we're going to talk about next.
Right.
But yeah, it's very energizing to build around those things. And it's just continued attunement and refinement.
And how did the nomad life start? Because you said you guys went to Chiang Mai and you really liked the life like that.
Well, even living in Taiwan, I felt like an expat nomad. I didn't grow up in Taiwan.
Right.
But I think I dabbled it in that 1 month trip where I visited Taipei for the first time and just working and living in a different place. I think I needed some space from like the Northeast US where I grew up, which is like, there's one way to like live life. There's the default
just
path of success. It's so much about money and success. And like all my friends were in that world. All my friends were like business schoolers and consultants who actually were just way better suited for that life than I was. And so I needed space from that. I needed space for myself to like not be like caught up in the local dramas and things like that. Like the news is just crazy in the US. And had that space in that trip. And I think that's what drew me to sort of be a nomad or expat. It's basically just not my home country. I think a lot of people can relate to that who are nomadic. They're sort of craving that like adventure and curiosity and just being in new places. And for me, it was also, I didn't do that in my early 20s. I didn't do that in college. I was sort of a little more scared to travel and try new things.
Right. Yeah, actually, that's true because I've met some Americans who don't even have a passport because all they're doing is just traveling in the country instead of going out. It's a big country. It is.
In Taiwan, you can only you can only visit Taroko like 12 times until you're like, okay, I'm gonna get a passport.
Right. So, what do you think the nomad life have brought you?
I think the unique thing with it is that there's a very like certain kind of person that loves that life. I just connect with those kind of people. My wife is one of those people, and we've made so many good friends, it's kind of bizarre sometimes how instantly you can make friends because you're self-selecting for such a weird life that if you meet other people living similarly, you have so much in common. And people are often open to instant connections. I think also just learning languages, learning different cultures. And I think I love being uncomfortable. Being in situations where I have to learn, I have to like figure out how to get groceries. I mean, I still feel this way in Taiwan sometimes. There's just so many rules sometimes.
Like what?
I mean, even just like going to like a pool, it's like, okay, you have to have a towel and a hairnet or a swim cap. And it's like, sometimes you just mess that up and you're like, all right, I got to figure this out, decode this, figure out the proper way, proper place to put my bag and things like this.
Because that's a dream. I always thought I also want to try the nomad life till that I was in Koh Samui.
Yeah.
And what I felt was I'm just literally working at another place. So it was actually really hard for me to keep the work-life balance because I spent most of my time in the hotel room. I didn't even get to enjoy the beach. All I was doing was just working. So how do you manage that?
I don't struggle with working too much.
Okay.
And so part of why I wanted to quit is because I wanted to build my life less centered around work. And so this is sort of the fundamental frame of like my own personal exploration and what I write about is like, I would make the claim that none of us are workers. We are not workers. We are humans. But many people in adulthood exist as a worker. You hang out with the people you hang out with because you work with them. You spend a certain amount of money because of like the kind of work you do.
Right.
You live near an office because that's where you work. And so part of moving abroad was to disconnect from like that worker identity I had in the US. And so a lot of my experimentation early on was experimenting with non-work. I really tried to anchor around, I only want to do work that makes me feel alive. That was writing for most of the time. And like anything I created or did, I wanted it to be independent of selling my time and things that I could make money independent, like me having to be anywhere. So everything had to be location independent and everything had to be time, not time dependent. I didn't want to sell my time. And so I took things very, very slowly early on. I didn't make more than 30 grand, which is about 20% of what I made previously for 5 years.
Was that scary for you?
I was so convinced I wasn't going to go back. I wasn't really thinking too much about it at the time.
Okay.
And my wife is so similarly wired to me. She thinks even less about money and plans. And so probably a bit of an enabler, but fell in love with writing. I knew I couldn't make money with writing early on, but I wanted to explore the questions of like, what is life if we are not a worker? How do you design life not centered around work? And part of that was like literally doing experiments of like, what if I don't sit down and work for a few weeks?
Did you actually try that?
Oh, many times. I've done many experiments. I've done months off. I just did another 6-week like mini sabbatical. Non-work isn't really non-work when you're a parent. Taking care of a toddler is like much harder than like work.
Right. So what did you actually do when you were not working, or taking those breaks?
I think what happens for me is I replace it with a lot of reading, time by myself, exercise, fitness, maybe cooking, long walks if I have alone time. Obviously, it's just much harder with a young child. But early on, that's what I would do. When I was first in Taiwan, I was living on probably about 20,000 NT a month. And I had enough savings for that to last probably quite a bit longer than that.
So you weren't working for a whole year?
No, I did some stuff to make money.
Okay.
But I wasn't trying to make money.
Right.
I probably made like 10,000 in that first year I moved to Taiwan. I had like a freelance gig that came up and I decided to do it. I was like dabbling with the online creation stuff. It was way harder to make money in 2018. But I was waking up and deciding every day, okay, I'm going to do stuff that makes me feel alive. writing, I just needed to do it. Like I loved it. And so you can't actually write that much. I think some people can write a lot, but I couldn't write more than 2 hours a day anyway. So maybe I'd write for an hour in the morning and then just like read a lot or wander or like, I don't know, just do whatever. And I was trying to disidentify with being a worker. It basically worked. I love almost all the work I do right now, but I don't work that much. Since having my daughter, I probably haven't worked more than 3 days in a week in 3 years.
And that's been 3 years.
Yeah. Though I am craving work a bit, mostly because like taking care of a young child is like a different kind of work that I need some rest from.
Right.
And I enjoy like writing. I miss writing. I want to write another book. And so I want to get working on that. Obviously, this is like work. I find this very energizing. But yeah, I have sort of disconnected. I've found like the lower bound of like how much work I can do.
Once said, wasting time is really important in our life, if you remember that.
Yeah, that's Amos Tversky's quote is like, I forget the exact quote. It's something about waste time so you don't waste years or something like that. Basically, I feel like I wasted the first 10 years of my career.
How so?
People look at that and are like, oh, so many credentials, so many impressive achievements. Right. I do literally nothing now that's related to that other than like teach the skills and
coaching
stuff.
People.
But if I had gotten started on that after like 2 years of working in consulting, I had like 8 years of energy and enthusiasm and creativity that I had to recover from. I wasted so many years. Then after quitting, it really took me a few years to sort of like heal from that mode I got myself into, that like tightness, that like really focused on achievement and the next step to like figure out what do I actually like to do? How do I want to spend my life? And starting to answer those questions in my mid-30s, which is just like, it's a lot harder, a lot more baggage.
And during those, when you're traveling around, how did you decide where you're going to stay or which country that you're going?
I basically would pick a friend and follow them. After my wife and I went to Chiang Mai, I actually had plans to go visit a friend in Bali.
Right.
I went to Bali. I met a bunch of people there. That was very transformative for me being there because I think I had decided, okay, I'm moving back to Taiwan. I am going to Bali first. I don't have a plan, but I'm really excited about all these things I'm doing. That's actually when I started like the online consulting training thing, because I was like, I need to do something to make money. I love doing this. Let's just see what happens with it.
Are you still doing that?
Yeah, that's the course I'm doing with Press Play. And it's still been going for like 7 years. It's done many iterations. That's sort of been something where I can like be in that teacher mode. It combines like all the things I enjoy doing, teaching, creating, experimenting with online stuff and things like that.
Do you coach people besides the course?
Yeah, so I do teams. I do workshops with companies. So it ranges from like consulting firms to like small and medium-sized consulting firms who just don't have training as part of their companies, or it'll be like analytics groups at big companies. I've taught people at like a industrial company in Indonesia, consulting firms in like the Middle East, like marketing consulting firms in the US. It's been all over the place.
Right.
And the interesting thing about it is I do the same thing I teach in that as I do in my books. Which is I follow my curiosity. I try to make sense of information. I absorb like enormous amounts of stuff, and then I try to synthesize it into a story. That's the same thing I did in consulting, and I love doing.
Right. For people who don't know, can you tell them like, what is consulting about?
Yeah. So consulting is like hundreds of billions of dollars industry globally. Consulting is very diverse. It can be many different things, from like HR consulting to like advising a company on like what benefits to offer employees, to like strategy consulting, which is the more like traditional consulting firms like McKinsey and BCG. And they might come in and a company might say, okay, we need to decide how many chips to buy from TSMC over the next like 6 months and like assess our CapEx. And you might work with their team and like develop a plan for them and like help them execute that.
Right.
increasingly, though, consulting firms are sort of like this extended bench for the economy. The economy's gotten so hyper specialized that so many people have different expertise and different talents that, for example, if you wanted to hire somebody could help you succeed in podcasting, you'd probably want to hire somebody that would work with 10, 20 different podcasters. You'd want to hire a consultant who's seen a wide range of experience and things like that. And so a lot of consulting is just that, which is like, okay, there's this group of people that focus narrowly on these topics. They're exceptional at it. They do it over and over again. They get better at it. They're good advisors. They're good people like that. And a lot of companies are operating at a different speed. So inside a company, you're just doing the day-to-day work you have to do. A consultant typically has a different time horizon, which says, okay, what's the 1 to 3 year plan? And a lot of times companies don't have employees that are focusing on different time spans.
What would you say to be the most stressful thing when it comes to consulting?
It's all the politics and internal stuff and like the people stuff. You work with a great team and somebody believes in you and cares about you, then you deal with somebody who's super worried about getting promoted to partner and really nervous about what the client thinks of them, and they stress you out. They're sending you emails at 2 a.m. Don't miss that, but I actually really liked it generally. I think it was just toward the end of my career, I was really good at doing the work, but I couldn't care about, oh, company X is going to make $1 million more. That just didn't personally fire me up at the start of the day. Versus some of my colleagues actually do get fired up about that. And so eventually most companies select for the people that actually care about what they're doing.
Does it ever happen that the plans or the project didn't work?
Oh, all the time. I mean, that's just business and organizations in general.
How did you deal with that?
Personally, it's very frustrating. But the job of consulting is constantly just trying to convince people to do stuff generally. And so that is also one of the more frustrating things. And so, I mean, in any organization, any group of people naturally resist change. And so a lot of your work is trying to tell persuasive stories such that if you do X, it will help things succeed. As a junior consultant, you're often in the weeds working with some other junior person at the company. Neither of you have power in this situation, but you're trying to like befriend this person so they'll like help you out. And so you can like work with them and like help them stand out in their career too. So that's often what you're doing early in career, is just trying to like form alliances to like help each other out.
So what would you say this course is for? Like who is the course for?
So it's really for like knowledge workers that want to get better at doing work, and especially people who are not working at companies where like they have the mentoring, coaching and things like that. It's really about how do you turn information into insight. And so this is what I was talking about with my book. It's really interesting to look back at my career. It's sort of this, I couldn't have planned becoming like a writer and online course creator, but like all the work in consulting that I loved, it's the same kind of work of like synthesizing ideas and telling stories. And so I love doing that. And so I teach people how to do that. It's pretty simple, or at least I try to break it down into simple terms. A lot of times when you're learning this stuff at companies, you go in these lecture halls and teachers lecture at you as if you can like absorb information from a PowerPoint slide. What I try to do is like break things down into simple and like fun and memorable ways of understanding things, and then push people to like practice them immediately.
So you wouldn't say it's only for business owners?
I don't even know if it's for business owners. It's probably more for people who are freelance consultants, people who are processing information, people in like data analytics, marketing, sales, different things like that. So it's basically for people that telling stories with information, which increasingly is a lot of knowledge work, is just persuading people to do stuff.
Yeah. So you worked with all those companies in all kinds of fields. Were you always familiar with the field?
It varies. I think increasingly consulting is specialized. So I was working in operations. I was often doing like Lean and Six Sigma stuff. And so over time, you work with enough companies, you understand that. But I didn't know the industries. I mean, I'd work in automotive, and you basically have to learn a ton of stuff really fast. A lot of Googling, a lot of researching, having calls with people who had worked at the companies and things like that. So you learn how to like make sense of a field pretty quick and like create your own frameworks of like, how are decisions made in this industry? What are the profit margins? What's the business structure? What are the challenges? All these different things.
Right. So for this course, what would you say that people can get from it?
It's the confidence that you are able to sort of think strategically on your own. I think so much of work, sadly, is trying to either meet your boss's expectations or perform tasks. When you're in that mode, all you're doing is solving for the finish line and working backwards and trying to like not disappoint people. You're not actually generating your own ideas. And so one of the big things I encourage people to do is like, do actually that same research on your own company. So many people don't do this. They're working for a big company in an industry, and I'll ask them, what does your CEO think about your company's investments over the next year? They're like, I don't know. It's like, well, that shapes literally everything in your company and every decision. If you can start making sense of like how your day-to-day tasks fit with that, suddenly you can like stand out. You can start speaking the language of like what your company is actually doing and how it's making decisions. And you can start to develop a sense of trust that, oh, I can make sense of what I'm doing and how it fits into a bigger picture. Now, your manager may not like that because they may be insecure about you doing that. They may not like you thinking about what the CEO does, right? Taiwanese culture can be very hierarchical sometimes. But for your own career and options and freedom, I think that's very important. I think that's another thing that gets me excited is like these skills are transmissible to all domains. And even if you pursue a path like ours, we're constantly synthesizing information and trying to communicate it in compelling ways.
Right.
So like my experience on YouTube helps me be a course creator, helps me be a writer, all fed from like the principles I learned in consulting. Right. Which is like, take your information, tell people why it matters. Start with that. That's what you do in the thumbnail on YouTube. Yeah. Tell people why it matters and get them to go in, and then you get them to stick around. Right. So where can they find this course? I believe on Press Play Academy. Yeah, just search Press Play, Paul Millerd or Mi Bao Luo. Oh, is that your Mandarin name? Mi Bao Luo. Mi Bao Luo. Oh, okay. 好. So if you're interested in the course, you can just go get on Press Play Academy, and we also have a discount code, right? We have a 300 discount for the course, and we'll put all the information in the description box. All right. After this, are you glad you didn't work in consulting, or you feel like you still wish you worked in consulting? After I started doing what I'm doing, I was already glad that I didn't do that. Yeah, because I saw how stressful it is to my friends. Because I really enjoy what I'm doing right now, that I can basically work wherever I am. That's so huge. I just need my laptop, my microphone, everything, and traveling around, even if I didn't really get to enjoy the trip. But that's already something when you get that kind of freedom. Yeah. Nice. All right. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Awesome.